He had known her name before she gave it. That was the part that would unravel everything. Later, when the music swelled and the masks came off, and the whole court stood watching. But for now, in the amber light of late afternoon, Ambrose Davenham leaned against the stone rail of the upper gallery and watched the woman below arrange glass burners along the edge of the banquet tables. And he said nothing. She moved carefully, precisely. Her hands, stained faintly gold at the fingertips from years of working with oils and resins, positioned each burner with the kind of attention most people reserved for sacred things. She did not look up. She did not scan the gallery the way a wolf with any sense of self-preservation would have done. She kept her head down, her dark red hair twisted into a low knot at her nape, and she worked as though the world above her did not exist. It did, though. He existed, and he remembered. The scent reached him even from this distance. White cedar and wild mint. Not the arrangement she was building for the gala, not the expensive oils she had been commissioned to blend. This was her scent. The one underneath. The one she could not mask. No matter how many vials she carried in that worn leather satchel. White cedar and wild mint. The smell of the Belcourt estate gardens in summer. Ambrose closed his eyes. The memory hit before he could stop it. A girl with scraped knees and red braids, crouching behind the hedgerow, laughing so hard she could not breathe. His mother's voice calling from the terrace. The taste of stolen pears. He had been 9. She had been 7. And the world had not yet learned how to be cruel. He opened his eyes. She was still arranging the burners, still invisible, still hiding in plain sight. He had 3 days before the gala. 3 days to decide how to tell her that he knew. That he had always known. That the girl who vanished when the Belcourt name burned had not vanished from his memory, not once, not for a single year in the 14 since. 3 days. And he already knew he would not wait that long. Corinne Belcourt arrived at the Davenham terraced keep on a Tuesday, with sore feet and a satchel full of lies. Not proper lies, professional ones. The kind a perfumer told when she could not afford to be memorable. She was Corinne Bell, not Belcourt. She was from the eastern trade roads, not from the burned-out estate 3 valleys south. She had learned her craft from a traveling apothecary, not from her mother, who had been the finest scent artist the Northern Territories had ever known, before the fire, before the soldiers, before everything ended. The keep itself nearly broke her composure. She had expected a fortress, something dark and military, all iron gates and wolf banners. Instead, the Davenham seat cascaded down a hillside in wide, elegant terraces, each level connected by stone stairways lined with flowering vines. The great hall sat at the highest point. Its arched windows opened to the valley below, and the light that poured through them was golden and warm and nothing like a cage. It was the kind of place her mother would have loved. She killed that thought quickly, buried it where she buried everything, in the space behind her ribs where useful feelings went to die. "You are the perfumer?" A woman appeared at the servants' entrance, wiping clay dust from her forearms. She was small, dark-haired, bright-eyed, and smiling in the way that people smiled when they were genuinely pleased to see a stranger. It was disorienting. "Corinne Bell," she said. "I was contracted for the gala scent arrangements." "Fia." The woman extended a clay-streaked hand. "Glassblower. I am making the decorative pieces for the table centerpieces. We are the only 2 artisans brought in from outside. Everyone else is in-house." She leaned closer. "Which means everyone else already has opinions about us." Corinne felt the corner of her mouth twitch. "Opinions?" "Oh, terrible ones. The head cook thinks I am going to shatter something important. The steward thinks you are going to make everything smell like a funeral. We are already in trouble, and we have not started yet." Despite herself, Corinne almost laughed. She had not almost laughed in a very long time, and the sensation startled her, like a muscle she had forgotten she possessed. Fia led her through the lower corridors to the workroom they had been assigned, a vaulted stone chamber on the second terrace, with a long table, good ventilation, and a view of the valley through a narrow window. Corinne's oils, resins, and dried herbs had arrived the day before, packed in straw-lined crates. She unpacked them methodically, lining the bottles in precise rows, checking each seal, each label, each color. Fia watched her for a moment, head tilted. "You handle those like they are alive." "They are, in a way. Scent degrades, oxidizes. A bottle of jasmine absolute that has been stored incorrectly will smell like nothing within a season. You have to know what you are holding." "That is how I feel about glass." Fia held up her hands, still dusted with fine clay. "People think it is the heat that matters, the furnace, the flame. But really, it is the cooling. You can make the most beautiful shape in the world, and if you cool it wrong, it shatters. The patience is the craft. The fire is just the beginning." Corinne looked at her. There was something in the way Fia spoke about her work, a reverence that had nothing to do with commerce and everything to do with devotion, that made Corinne's chest tighten with recognition. "You love it," Corinne said. Not a question. "More than anything. More than is probably wise." Fia smiled. "You?" Corinne opened a bottle of bergamot and held it toward her. Fia leaned in, breathed, and her eyes widened. "Oh," she said, "that is beautiful." "That is what I love," Corinne said quietly. "The moment someone smells something and forgets, just for a second, to guard themselves. Scent bypasses everything. All the walls, all the armor, all the careful faces people wear. It goes straight through." In a world of wolves, where every emotional state announced itself through scent whether you wanted it to or not, a perfumer occupied a strange and powerful position. She could amplify. She could mask. She could design an olfactory landscape that guided emotion the way a composer guided feeling through music. Most people did not think about it. Most people walked into a room and felt something shift, felt calmer or more alert or more open, and they never traced it back to the careful arrangement of scent burners and oil diffusers and dried herb sachets that someone like Corinne had placed there. That was the art. That was the invisibility she had chosen. Not the invisibility of powerlessness, but the invisibility of influence so subtle it was undetectable. Her mother had taught her that memory lives in scent the way it lives nowhere else. The mind forgets. The nose never does. She would prepare the arrangements. She would set them in the great hall. She would leave before the gala began, collect her fee from the steward, and disappear back into the anonymity she had built so carefully over the past 14 years. She would not think about who lived here. She would not think about the boy she had known, the one who had grown into the most feared alpha king in the Northern Territories. She would not think about the last time she had seen him, a 15-year-old with wild black hair and horrified eyes, standing on the ridge above the Belcourt estate as it burned. She would not think about any of it. The first scent bottle she opened was white cedar oil, and the smell hit her like a fist, and she stood very still for a long time, breathing through it, waiting for the past to let go. She worked for 2 days without seeing him. This was by design. She learned the rhythms of the keep quickly, which corridors were used by the household staff, which hours the upper terraces were empty, which stairways led to the great hall, without passing through any of the public rooms where the Alpha King and his court spent their days. She moved through the keep like smoke, present but unnoticed, and she told herself this was skill, not fear. Fia, who had no such instinct for invisibility, appeared at regular intervals with bread, commentary, and a cheerful disregard for Corinne's preference for silence. "You know what I heard?" Fia said on the second morning, perching on the edge of the work table while Corinne blended a citrus and sage arrangement for the gallery torches. The gala is not just a gala. It is his annual court reception. Every territory leader in the north will be here. Every alpha, every lord, every minor noble with a claim to press or a daughter to offer. The whole great hall. 500 guests. I do not need to know the guest list, Corinne said. I need to know the room dimensions and the airflow. You are no fun at all. I am not here to be fun. I am here to make the hall smell like something other than 500 wolves in formal wear. Fia laughed. It was a bright, uncomplicated sound, and Corinne found herself storing it away somewhere, the way she stored rare scents, carefully in case she needed it later. That afternoon, she carried the first set of burners to the great hall. The room was vast, high-ceilinged, with stone columns wrapped in flowering ivy and a long row of arched windows that opened onto the highest terrace. Tables were being arranged. Banners were being hung. The floor was being polished to a shine that caught the afternoon light and threw it back in fragments. She set the burners along the window ledge first, spacing them at precise intervals, filling each with a base of warm amber and cedar wood that would catch the evening breeze and carry the scent across the room. She was crouching beside the third burner, adjusting the wick height when it happened. The memory came without warning. Rain on a stone garden path. Small, bare feet, a boy's hand in hers, pulling her toward the greenhouse. Hurry up, Corey, before they catch us. Laughter. The sweet green smell of crushed mint leaves. His eyes, gold even then, bright with mischief. She dropped the wick trimmer. It clattered against the stone floor, and the sound broke the memory apart, and she was back in the great hall, kneeling on the polished stone, her hands trembling. That had not been a memory she had chosen. It had arrived like a scent, involuntary and absolute, as if the room itself had produced it. As if proximity to this place, to these stones, to the air he breathed, was enough to pull the past out of the walls. She picked up the trimmer. She steadied her hands. She finished the row. She did not look at the upper gallery. She did not look at the balcony where a figure might have been standing, watching, with gold eyes that saw everything and said nothing. She did not look, and so she did not see. The steward found her that evening. She was in her workroom, blending the final arrangement, a complex layered scent designed to build over the course of the gala evening, shifting from bright citrus at the opening to warm spice at its peak to soft, musky amber by the end. It was the most ambitious blend she had ever attempted, and she was deep in the work when the door opened without a knock. "You are the scent maker." She looked up. The man in the doorway was tall, narrow-shouldered, and dressed in a dark burgundy wool coat with a gold chain of office hanging across his chest. His eyes were black, not dark brown. Black, the way a well was black, with nothing at the bottom. "Corinne Bell," she said. "Perfumer." "Roland Critchley, Master of Ceremonies." He did not extend a hand. He surveyed the workroom the way a man surveyed property he was considering purchasing, with the detached assessment of someone who knew the price of everything. "Your arrangements have been adequate so far." "Thank you." "Do not thank me. It was not a compliment. Adequate is the minimum." He picked up one of her bottles, turned it in his gloved fingers, read the label, set it down slightly out of place. "You are aware that the gala is the single most important social event in the Northern Territories. The Alpha King's court reception sets the tone for the entire political season. Everything must be flawless." "I was contracted for the scent work," Corinne said carefully. "I intend to deliver exactly what was agreed." "Good." He studied her for a moment too long. Something shifted behind those black eyes, something she could not read, and it made the hair on the back of her neck rise. "Where did you say you trained?" "The Eastern Trade Roads, under a traveling apothecary." He smiled. It did not reach his eyes. Peculiar. Your blending technique is unusually refined for someone trained on the road. Almost aristocratic, one might say. Her pulse jumped. She kept her expression still. I had a talented teacher. Indeed. He turned toward the door, then paused. The gala begins at sundown tomorrow. All commissioned artisans will complete their work and vacate the hall by mid-afternoon. You will not be present for the event itself. This is not a public gathering. It is a VIP reception. Invitations only. I understand. Make sure you do. He left. The door closed. Corinne stood motionless for a full minute, listening to her own heartbeat, counting the beats until it slowed. He had looked at her the way people looked at things they intended to use. She had seen that look before, 14 years ago, on the face of the man who had come to the Belcourt estate with soldiers and fire and a forged decree of seizure. She had been 7 years old. She had not seen that man's face clearly. She had been running, pulled by her mother's hand into the woods, away from the flames. But she remembered the feeling, the cold certainty that someone was calculating her worth, not as a person, but as a problem. She packed her remaining oils with shaking hands and told herself she was imagining things. But sleep did not come that night. She lay on the narrow cot in the artisan's quarters, staring at the stone ceiling, and she thought about Critchley's black eyes and Critchley's gloved hands and Critchley's smile that was not a smile. She thought about the fire. It came back the way it always did, in fragments. The orange light reflecting off the walls of her bedroom, her mother's hand, cold and hard, gripping hers, the sound of boots on the gravel drive, the smell, acrid and choking, of her world converting itself into smoke. She had not seen the man who gave the orders. She had been too small, too frightened, too focused on keeping her feet moving as her mother pulled her through the garden gate and into the forest beyond. Her mother had died 3 years later. Fever. The kind of fever that took hold in cold, damp rooms in the charity quarters of a village that had no reason to care about a woman and child whose name was suddenly dangerous. Corinne had been 10. She had buried her mother in an unmarked grave and inherited nothing but a leather case of scent oils and the knowledge of how to use them. She sat up, swung her legs off the cot, pressed her bare feet to the cold stone floor and breathed. The white cedar oil was on the table. She opened it without thinking, held it beneath her nose, and breathed the Belcourt gardens back to life. Green hedgerows, flagstone paths warm from the sun. Her mother's hands, steady and sure, grinding dried mint between her palms and releasing the sharp, clean scent into the air. Breathe it in, Corey. Mint clears the mind and steadies the heart. She capped the bottle, steadied her heart. Tomorrow she would finish the arrangements. The day after she would collect her fee and leave. That was the plan. The plan had not changed. The plan had not accounted for gold eyes and a voice she recognized in her bones, but the plan had not changed. The next morning she finished the arrangements. She placed the last burners in the great hall just after dawn, when the room was empty and the light was thin and blue. The scent she had built was layered and alive, citrus and fresh herbs at the surface, warm spice and cedarwood beneath, and at the very base, so faint it was almost a whisper, white cedar and wild mint. She had not meant to include that last note. Her hands had done it without her permission, adding 3 drops of the white cedar oil and 2 of the wild mint to the base blend, and by the time her mind caught up with her fingers, the scent was already sealed. It did not matter. No one would notice. It was buried so deep in the arrangement that only someone with an extraordinarily sensitive nose, or someone who knew that exact scent from memory, would ever detect it. She was crouching beside the last burner, adjusting the placement when the doors at the far end of the hall opened. She knew who it was before she turned around, not because she heard him. He moved quietly for a man of his size, not because she saw him. She was facing the windows. She knew because the air in the room changed. Because the memory hit again, harder this time, brighter. Sunlight on a stone wall. A boy sitting cross-legged, reading aloud from a book of maps while she braided wildflowers into a crown. The scratch of his voice when he laughed. The weight of the flower crown when she placed it on his head. "There," she had said. "Now you look like a proper king." He had been 10. He had worn it for the rest of the afternoon. She stood up too quickly. The burner wobbled. She caught it, steadied it, and turned around. Ambrose Davenham stood halfway across the hall, and he was exactly what she had been afraid he would be. Tall, broad through the shoulders in a way that suggested he had grown into his frame early and decisively. Black hair, jaw length, loosely tousled, as if he could not be bothered to tame it. A midnight blue velvet long coat with gold wolf head clasps at the collar, fitted close through the body, the kind of garment that cost more than she would earn in a year. And his eyes, gold. Not amber, not brown, not hazel. Gold, the way sunlight through honey was gold, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that made her lungs forget how to work. He was holding a book in one hand, loosely, as if he had been reading and had forgotten about it the moment he walked in. The detail startled her. The alpha king she had imagined, the one built from rumors and reputation, did not carry books. He carried commands. He carried the weight of territories. He carried fear. This man carried a book. "You are the perfumer," he said. His voice was low and steady, and it was the voice from the memory, and it was not. Deeper now, rougher. But underneath the roughness, the same cadence, the same careful way he placed his words, as if each one had been chosen. "Yes, Your Majesty." She dropped her gaze, lowered her head, made herself small. "Corinne Bell. I was just finishing the arrangements. I will be out of your way shortly." He took a step closer, then another. She could feel the warmth of him, the sheer physical presence, and something beneath it. A pull, steady and deep, like a current in dark water. Her wolf, the quiet, careful wolf that she kept leashed and hidden, stirred for the first time in years. Not with fear, with recognition. Something old and wordless, something that lived in the blood and bone rather than the mind, lifted its head. She pushed it down. She was good at pushing things down. "The scent is extraordinary," he said. He had stopped a few feet from her, close enough that she could see the way the morning light caught the gold in his eyes, fractured it, made it warm. The bass note, white cedar and wild mint. Her blood went cold. "It reminds me of something." His voice was quiet, almost careful. "A garden I knew once, a long time ago." She could not breathe. She could not look up. If she looked up, he would see her face. And her face would tell him everything, because she had never learned how to lie with her face, only with her name. "I use traditional northern botanicals," she said. Her voice was steady. "Barely. The combination is common in this region." A silence. Long. Too long. "Of course," he said finally. "I must have been thinking of something else." She heard him turn, heard his footsteps cross the hall, measured and unhurried, heard the doors close. She sank to her knees beside the burner and pressed her hands flat against the cold stone floor and breathed. He had known. That pause, that silence, that careful, too gentle, "of course." He had recognized the scent. He had given her the chance to tell the truth, and she had lied, and he had let her. She had to leave. Today. Now. Before the gala, before the court arrived, before anyone else looked at her the way Critchley had looked at her and started asking questions she could not answer. She gathered her tools, packed her satchel, and went to find the steward's office to collect her fee. She never reached it. Fia intercepted her in the lower corridor, breathless, her dark eyes wide. Corinne, something is wrong. What? Critchley, the master of ceremonies. He was in the steward's office this morning. I heard him talking about you. Fia lowered her voice. He told the steward to cancel your payment and have the guards escort you from the keep before midday. He said your work was substandard and your credentials could not be verified. The ground shifted beneath Corinne's feet. My credentials are genuine. The contract was signed weeks ago. I know, but Critchley controls the gala. If he says you are out, you are out. The steward will not overrule him. Fia gripped her arm. There is more. He was asking about your name, your real name. He sent a messenger to the eastern trade roads to check your story. The cold in Corinne's chest spread outward, into her hands, her throat, her face. She had been so careful. 14 years of careful, and one man with black eyes had looked at her blending technique and seen through the entire architecture of her disguise. Why? Fia asked. Why does he care who you are? Corinne closed her eyes. The truth sat in her throat like a stone, heavy and impossible. Because, she said very quietly, I think he already knows. She tried to leave cleanly. She packed her things, shouldered her satchel, walked toward the lower gate. But the guards were already there, and they were not opening the gate, and the one on the left had the flat, apologetic expression of a man following orders he did not enjoy. The Master of Ceremonies requests that you remain on the grounds until your credentials have been verified, the guard said, for the keep's security. I am a perfumer, Corinne said, not a threat. Orders, miss. She was trapped. Not imprisoned exactly, but contained, kept in the lower corridors and the servants' quarters while the gala preparations continued above her, while the guests arrived in carriages and on foot, and in wolf form, while the music began drifting down through the stone like something she was meant to hear but never see. She paced the workroom. She considered climbing. The window overlooked the second terrace, and from there she could reach the outer wall, and from the wall she could drop into the garden, and from the garden she could disappear into the valley the way she had disappeared from every place that had ever begun to feel like something she could not afford to keep. But her tools were still in the great hall. Her best distillation flask, the one that had been her mother's, the one with the hairline crack along the rim that she had patched with beeswax and prayer. She had left it beside the last burner she placed that morning. She could not leave it behind. She could not leave the last physical piece of her mother in a hall full of strangers. She sank onto the workroom steps and pressed her forehead against her knees. 14 years. She had built a life from scraps, a name from silence, a reputation from talent that she could never fully explain because explaining it meant explaining who had taught her, and who had taught her meant the Belcourt name, and the Belcourt name meant danger. And now a man in a burgundy coat with black eyes had looked at her hands and seen through all of it. Fia found her sitting on the steps, staring at nothing. Come to the gala, Fia said. I was not invited. You heard Critchley. I am barely permitted to be on the grounds. I have a service pass for the lower entrance. Artisans can enter through the gallery corridor to check on their work during the event. Critchley does not control that door. Fia crouched beside her, her dark eyes fierce. Corinne, you built those scent arrangements. You spent 3 days designing a fragrance that will shape the emotional experience of every person in that room tonight. Your work is in that hall. Your mother's flask is in that hall. You have every right to be there. Corinne looked at her. How did you know about the flask? I saw you packing it this morning. I saw how you held it. Fia's voice softened. The way you hold things that matter is different from the way you hold things that are just useful. You think no one notices, but I notice. Something cracked in Corinne's chest. A small, quiet fracture, like ice on a river beginning to thaw. Once you are inside, Fia continued, You can find the Alpha King directly and explain what Critchley is doing. Going over his head? I cannot speak to the Alpha King. Why not? Because he will look at me with those gold eyes and I will fall apart. Because the last time I saw him I was 7 years old and my world was on fire, and he was standing on the ridge watching it burn, and I have never stopped seeing his face when I close my eyes. Because I felt something in that hall yesterday. Something old and deep and terrifying. And if I get close to him again, I am afraid it will crack me open, and everything I have kept sealed for 14 years will come pouring out, and I will never be able to put it back. It is complicated, Corinne said. Everything worth doing is complicated, Fia said. Come, before I lose my nerve and you lose your chance. The gallery corridor was narrow, poorly lit, and full of kitchen staff carrying trays. Fia led. Corinne followed. The sounds of the gala grew louder with each step. Music and laughter, and the deep, resonant hum of hundreds of voices speaking at once, a sound like a living thing, a wall of noise she would have to walk through. They passed a kitchen runner who glanced at Fia's service pass and waved them on. They turned a corner. Another. The corridor opened onto a narrow stairway, and then they reached the gallery entrance, a small archway that opened onto the mezzanine above the great hall, and Corinne stopped. The hall below was transformed. 500 guests filled the space, dressed in silks and velvets and furs, their laughter and conversation rising like heat. The scent arrangements burned perfectly, the citrus bright and cutting through the warmth of so many bodies, the spice notes rising beneath. Chandeliers blazed. Music played from somewhere she could not see, a string quartet whose melody threaded through the noise like silver through stone. And at the center of it all, seated at the head of the long table on a raised platform, was Ambrose Davenham, gold circlet on his black hair, the most powerful man in the Northern Territories, listening to a lord speak, and looking like he would rather be anywhere else in the world. She gripped the archway with both hands. Her wolf stirred again, that quiet, restless stirring she had felt in the great hall 2 days ago, and with it came the pull, the bond. Even from the mezzanine, even from 30 feet above and 100 feet across, she felt it. A thread of warmth connecting her chest to his, taut and trembling and real. As if he felt it too, he looked up. His eyes found hers across the crowded, blazing hall with the speed and precision of something instinctive. Something that had been waiting. She pulled back from the archway. Her heart was hammering. There, Fia whispered. Go down, through the main doors. Walk in like you belong. I do not belong. Then walk in like you do not care. Corinne descended the gallery stairs. Her hands were steady. Her legs were not. She crossed the lower foyer where servants moved in efficient patterns carrying platters and pitchers, and she felt like a stone in a river, something the current had to flow around. She reached the main entrance to the great hall, where 2 guards stood in formal armor, flanking the doors. She stepped forward. The guard on the right put up his hand. Invitation, please. I am one of the commissioned artisans, Corinne said. I prepared the scent arrangements for the hall. I need to check on one of the burners. This entrance is for invited guests only. You need a VIP invitation to enter the gala. I am not a guest. I am here for maintenance. Service staff uses the kitchen corridor. This door is VIP only. His tone was not unkind, but it was final. He looked past her, already dismissing her, and she stood there in her sage green bodice and her plum wool shawl with her stained fingers and her worn boots, and she felt, with a visceral, old precision, the exact shape of not belonging. She had felt it before. At 7, when the neighbors closed their doors. At 12, when the apothecary who took her in reminded her that charity had limits. At 16, when the first patron who hired her asked if she really came from nowhere, because her hands worked like someone who had been taught by someone who mattered. She turned to leave. Wait. The voice came from inside the hall. Low. Carrying. The kind of voice that did not need to be raised because every ear in range was already tuned to it. Corinne turned back. Ambrose was walking toward the entrance. Not hurrying. Not hesitating. Walking with the measured, deliberate stride of a man who had made a decision and intended the entire room to witness it. The crowd parted. Not because he pushed through them, not because he commanded them to move, but because his presence was a physical force, a gravity. And people stepped aside the way water stepped aside for stone. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to lips. 500 wolves turned to watch their king cross the hall, and every one of them understood, with the instinct that all wolves shared, that something was about to change. His gold eyes were locked on hers, and his expression was calm and certain and furious and tender, all at once. He reached the doors. He looked at the guard. The guard straightened. "Your Majesty, she does not have a VIP in V." Ambrose reached down and took her hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and sure and deliberate, and the memory hit them both at the same time. She felt it, and she saw in his face that he felt it too. A stone wall in summer, a flower crown, a boy's voice saying, "If anyone tries to send you away, I will tell them you are with me." "She is with me," Ambrose said. He said it to the guard. He said it to the hall. He said it to every lord and lady and alpha and noble who had turned to watch. 500 faces lit by chandelier light. 500 wolves who had just seen the most powerful man in the north reach past his own guards to take the hand of a woman in a perfumer's shawl. His hand tightened around hers. Not pulling, not dragging, holding. The way you held something precious that you had been waiting 14 years to hold again. "Come," he said quietly, for her alone. "You have been hiding long enough." He led her into the hall, and the hall made room. It was not a gentle accommodation. It was the startled, uncertain rearrangement of people who were watching something they did not understand and were not sure they wanted to. Corinne felt their eyes like weight, like heat, like hands pressing against her skin. She was acutely aware of everything wrong with her. The stained fingertips, the worn boots, the shawl that was beautiful in a workroom and absurd in a sea of silk. Ambrose did not let go of her hand. He led her past the long tables, past the wine stewards, past a cluster of women in jeweled gowns who stared with open mouths, to a chair beside his own at the head of the hall. He pulled it out for her. He waited. "Sit," he said. Not a command, an invitation. The kind a boy would make to a girl he was trying to keep safe from a world that did not deserve her. She sat. Her legs were shaking. He took the seat beside her. Close. His shoulder almost touching hers. A wine steward appeared, pouring without being asked, and the deep red liquid caught the chandelier light and glowed like a jewel. A plate was set before her, roasted game with herbs and honeyed root vegetables, and the smell of it mixed with the scent arrangements she had built, and for a disorienting moment she could not tell where her craft ended and the world began. The woman on Ambrose's other side, a silver-haired territory lady in emerald velvet, leaned forward and looked at Corinne with open curiosity. "I do not believe we have been introduced." "She is my guest," Ambrose said, in a tone that closed the door on further questions without slamming it. The woman sat back, but the look she gave Corinne was not unkind. It was measuring, careful, the kind of look that said, "I do not know what you are, but you are interesting, and I will wait." Corinne picked up the wine glass. Her fingers left faint gold smudges on the crystal. She noticed, and the shame was immediate, visceral, the stained hands of a tradeswoman on the king's crystal. She put the glass down. Ambrose noticed. He reached out, lifted the glass, placed it back in her hand. His fingers brushed hers, and the bond surged. A summer kitchen, flour on the table, his mother laughing as he tried to braid bread dough and failed spectacularly. Corinne beside him, her small hands showing his how to fold, how to twist, how to tuck. Like this, Ambrose. Gently. She gasped. He felt it too. She could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his breathing changed, the way his hand lingered against hers for a fraction of a second too long. The memories, she whispered. They are getting stronger. They do that. The closer we are, the more the bond tries to surface what it has been holding. What it has been holding? 14 years of stored moments. Everything the bond recorded and could not deliver because we were apart. His voice was low, intended only for her. It is like a river that has been dammed. Proximity opens the gates. She looked at him. He was watching her with the patience of someone who had been waiting so long that the waiting itself had become a kind of home, familiar and worn and impossible to abandon. You have been living with this, she said. The memories, the pull. For how long? Since I was old enough to understand what a mate bond felt like. And you never said anything. You never told anyone. There was nothing to tell. You were gone. I did not know if you were alive. I only knew that the bond was there, and it was yours, and it was waiting. The ache in her chest expanded until it filled her entirely, crowding out the fear and the shame and the 14 years of careful, deliberate loneliness. He had carried this, alone. The most powerful man in the North, surrounded by hundreds of people at any given moment, and he had carried a bond to a girl who had vanished like smoke, and he had told no one. The scent of him, pine and iron and something warmer, something that lived beneath the formal armor of a king, wrapped around her like a second shawl, and the memory came again. Running through the greenhouse, the crash of a pot breaking, his hand pulling her behind the potting bench. Shh, Corey. They will not find us here. Stop, she whispered. Please. He looked at her. The gold eyes, impossibly close now, searched her face with a patience that made her chest ache. I do not know what is happening, she said. The memories, they keep coming. Every time I am near you, I see things. A garden, a greenhouse, a boy. They are not hallucinations, he said softly. They are yours. They are real. Her breath caught. I know who you are, Corinne. The name, not Belle, not the perfumer. Corinne. Just Corinne. Spoken with the quiet, absolute certainty of someone who had been carrying it for a very long time. I have known since the moment you walked through the gate 3 days ago, he said. I knew your scent before I knew your face. White cedar and wild mint. The Belcourt Gardens. I would know it anywhere. Her eyes burned. She blinked hard. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of 500 strangers who were already staring at her like she was an exotic species that had wandered in from the wild. Why did you not say anything? She asked. Because you were not ready. Because you had built your disguise so carefully, and I did not have the right to tear it down just because I recognized you. He paused. And because the last time I saw you, your home was burning, and I was 15 years old and I could not stop it. And I have never forgiven myself for that. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Corinne stared at him. You were a boy, she said. You could not have stopped it. I know. That does not make the memory easier to carry. A silence opened between them, not empty but full, packed with 14 years of grief and distance, and the strange, persistent ache of a connection that had survived the destruction of everything around it. The bond, she said. The memories. What is it? I think you know. She did. She had known since the first memory struck in the great hall, since the first involuntary flash of rain and laughter and small hands clasped together. She had known, and she had refused to name it because naming it would make it real, and real things could be taken away. We were children, she said. It is not possible. It is rare. It is not impossible. He was careful, gentle, as if he understood that every word was a door, and she was standing on the threshold, deciding whether to walk through. Some bonds form early and wait. They root before either person is old enough to understand them, and they surface when proximity makes them impossible to ignore. That is why the memories come? Yes. That is why you brought me in from outside the gates 3 days ago. Why you commissioned a perfumer from the eastern trade roads instead of using your own court suppliers. A silence. Then, very quietly, yes. You were looking for me. I have been looking for you for 14 years. He said it without drama, without performance. He said it the way he might have said the sun rises in the east. A fact. Immovable. I searched every trade road, every village, every refugee registry. I followed the trail of a woman who blended sense with techniques no one on the trade roads should have known. I tracked your commissions across 3 territories, and when I found you, I did not summon you. I offered a contract. Because you deserved to come on your own terms, not because a king demanded it. Her vision blurred. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. You could have told me, she said. You would have run. She had no answer for that because he was right. Across the hall, Roland Critchley watched from the shadow of a stone column, and his face was the color of ash. He had miscalculated. The perfumer was supposed to be gone by now. Removed. Discredited. Vanished back into the nameless roads she had crawled out of, taking the Belcourt scent and the Belcourt features, and the Belcourt blending technique with her, where no one of consequence would ever connect the dots. He had not anticipated the king. He had not anticipated the king walking across his own gala, past 500 guests, past every protocol and precedent, to take a common tradesperson's hand and seat her at the high table. Critchley straightened his coat, adjusted his chain of office, calculated. The Belcourt lands had been his for 14 years, seized through a decree that bore the right seals but the wrong authority. A decree that had been drafted in his study, not the old king's court. No one had questioned it because the Belcourts were dead, or so everyone believed, and dead families did not contest property claims. But the girl was alive, and the girl was sitting next to the king. And if the king had truly known who she was for 3 days, then the king had 3 days to pull the old records, to examine the seizure decree, to discover that the seals were forged. Critchley needed her gone. Not tomorrow. Now. He stepped out of the shadow. He smoothed his gloves. He had done this before. Not the exact scenario, but the architecture of it. The careful dismantling of someone's credibility in a public setting. The weaponization of doubt disguised as concern. He had done it to the Belcourt family 14 years ago. Whispered treason allegations into the right ears, produced documents that looked authentic enough to survive a cursory inspection, created a narrative of guilt so complete that by the time the soldiers arrived at the estate, the question was not whether the Belcourts were traitors, but how severely they should be punished. He had been 24 years old then, ambitious, hungry. The Belcourt lands bordered his own meager holdings, and the Belcourts themselves. A family of artists and scent crafters with no political allies strong enough to protect them had been easy, disturbingly easy. The kind of easy that taught a young man that the world was made of paper, and anyone with a sharp enough pen could rewrite it. He had not expected the daughter to survive. He certainly had not expected her to walk back into a hall on the arm of the Alpha King himself. But Roland Critchley had not survived 14 years of deception by panicking. He had survived by controlling the narrative. And the narrative was simple. She was an unverified stranger who had infiltrated the king's table. All he had to do was make the room see her that way. He walked toward the high table. He smiled. "Your Majesty." Critchley stopped before the raised platform, his voice pitched to Carrie. I see you have found the perfumer. I must confess, I was about to report a concern. The hall shifted. Conversations dimmed. Heads turned. Critchley had timed it perfectly, the lull between courses, when the room's attention was unfocused and available. A concern, Ambrose repeated. His tone was neutral. His hand, beneath the table, found Corinne's and held it. Her credentials, Your Majesty. I dispatched a messenger to verify her identity. A Corinne Bell trained on the Eastern trade roads. He paused for effect. No such person exists. There is no record of her apprenticeship, no trade guild registration, no verifiable history. She is, I am afraid, a fraud. The word dropped into the hall like a coin into a well. Corinne felt it hit her chest. The old reflexes, honed by 14 years of survival, screamed at her to drop her gaze, to make herself small, to apologize and disappear and rebuild her life somewhere else, somewhere further, somewhere no one would ever find her. But Ambrose's hand was around hers, and it was warm, and it was steady, and it did not let go. Is that so? Ambrose said. I recommend she be removed from the hall immediately and held for questioning. We cannot have an unverified stranger at the king's table during the most sensitive political gathering of the year. He was good, Corinne realized. His voice was concerned, measured, reasonable. He sounded like a man doing his duty. He sounded like a man protecting his king. Roland. Ambrose's voice had not changed in volume, but something in its texture shifted, the way the air shifted before a storm, and the hall went silent. I have a question for you. Of course, Your Majesty. 14 years ago, a decree was issued for the seizure of the Belcourt estate. The family's lands, holdings, and property were confiscated following allegations of treason. The family was scattered. The estate was burned. Critchley's smile did not waver, but something behind his eyes went very still. That decree, Ambrose continued, bore the seal of my father's court. I have spent the past 3 days examining it. Would you like to know what I found? Silence. Absolute. The kind of silence that had weight, that pressed against the walls and the windows and the 500 people who were no longer breathing. The seal was forged, Ambrose said. The decree was never authorized by my father. The treason charges were fabricated. The Belcourt family was destroyed based on documents that originated from a single source. He looked at Critchley. Your study, Roland, your seal, your handwriting on the draft. The color left Critchley's face. It drained like water from a cracked vessel, leaving behind something pale and hollow. You seized their lands. You burned their home. You scattered a family and took everything they owned, including a 7-year-old girl who spent the next 14 years hiding her name because you taught her that her name was dangerous. Ambrose stood. The chair scraped against the stone. He was tall, and in the chandelier light, with the gold circlet on his black hair and the fury in his gold eyes, he looked like something out of the old stories, the ones where kings were not politicians but forces of nature, inevitable and absolute. Her name, he said, is Corinne Belcourt, daughter of Matthias and Alara Belcourt, heir to the Belcourt estate, and she is not a fraud. She is the woman whose home you stole. Critchley took a step backward, then another. Guards, Ambrose said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Take Roland Critchley into custody. The charges are forgery, treason, and the unlawful seizure of a noble house's holdings. He will stand trial before the full court. The guards moved. Critchley did not resist. There was nothing left to resist with. The architecture of his 14-year deception collapsed around him like a house with its foundations pulled out, and he went silently, and the hall watched, and no one spoke. Corinne stood at the edge of the highest terrace, her hands on the stone rail, and breathed. The gala continued below. She could hear the music, The murmur of conversation resuming, the tentative return of normalcy after the earthquake Ambrose had just delivered to his own court. She should have been down there. She should have been at the table, accepting congratulations or condolences or whatever. 500 startled wolves offered a woman who had just been publicly resurrected from a 14-year erasure. But she needed air. She needed the sky, dark and clear above the valley, and the scent of the night wind, clean and free of politics and perfume and the complicated, devastating weight of being known. She heard him before she saw him, the quiet footstep, the shift in the air, the warmth. "You do not have to go back in," he said, stepping onto the terrace beside her. "Not tonight, not ever if you do not want to." She laughed. It was a rough, wet sound. Nothing like Fia's bright laughter, more like something dislodged from a place where it had been stuck. "You just declared my identity in front of every political leader in the North. I think going back in is inevitable." "I should have asked you first." He came to stand beside her, close enough to touch, not touching. "I should have given you the choice. I saw Critchley moving and I reacted. I am sorry. You exposed the man who destroyed my family. Do not apologize for that. I exposed your identity without your consent. That is different." She was quiet for a moment. The night wind carried the last traces of her scent arrangement from the hall below, warm spice and amber, the evening notes she had designed to settle over the crowd like a blanket. Even now, even standing on the edge of the most significant moment of her life, part of her registered the scent professionally, noting how the amber had opened beautifully, how the bass notes were holding. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Anything." "The fire. You were on the ridge. You saw it." She kept her voice steady. "What did you do?" "After." He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "I ran. Down the hill. Toward the estate. One of my father's guards caught me and held me back. I fought him. I was 15, and I was not small, but he was a trained soldier, and he held me while the house burned. He told me there was nothing I could do." A pause. He was right. There was nothing I could do. I was the heir to a kingdom, and I could not save a single family. "You were a child. So were you. And you survived. You survived without a kingdom behind you, without guards, without a name. You survived with a leather satchel and your mother's knowledge, and you built a life. Do you understand what that means?" She shook her head. "It means you are the strongest person I have ever met. And I have met every alpha in the North." The words landed somewhere deep, somewhere she had not allowed anything to land in years, and she felt the ground beneath her shift, not with instability, but with the opposite, with the sudden startling sensation of foundation where there had been only sand. She turned to look at him. The moonlight caught the gold in his eyes, made them luminous, and she thought about a boy in a flower crown, reading maps aloud in the sunlight. And she thought about a 15-year-old on a ridge, watching her world burn. And she thought about a man who had searched for 14 years and then, when he found her, had offered a contract instead of a command. "You said something," she murmured. "At the door. When the guard stopped me. You said, 'She is with me.'" "Yes. You said the same thing once before, when we were children. When your father's steward tried to send me home because I was not noble enough to play in the king's garden." His expression shifted. Something cracked behind the composure, something raw and young and startled. "You remember that?" "I remember everything." She stepped closer. The bond surged. Memories flooded, not one at a time now, but all at once. A cascade, the garden and the greenhouse and the flower crown and the maps and the rain and the sound of his laughter and the weight of his hand in hers. And she did not fight it. For the first time, she let it come. She let it fill her. "I spent 14 years being no one," she said. "I was very good at it. I made invisibility into an art form. And then you walked across your own gala past 500 people, and you took my hand, and you made me visible. You were never invisible to me, he said. Not for a single day. She kissed him. She did not decide to do it. Her body decided. Her hands came up and found his jaw, rough with the shadow of a late evening, and she pulled him down to her, and her mouth found his. And the world, for one long, suspended, infinite moment, went completely silent. He kissed her back. Carefully at first, then not carefully at all. His hands finding her waist, her ribs, the curve of her spine, pulling her into him with a tenderness that was also hunger, a 14-year hunger, patient and vast and finally allowed to surface. He tasted like wine and cedar and something warm and grounding and his. His scent wrapped around her and hers wrapped around him, and the bond, the old, deep, patient bond that had waited since they were children, settled into place with a sound that was not a sound, that was more like the click of a key turning in a lock that had never been opened before. When they pulled apart, his forehead rested against hers, and his breath was ragged, and his eyes were closed. I should tell you, he said, voice rough, that the Belcourt estate has been restored. I signed the order 3 days ago. Your family's lands, your mother's gardens, everything Critchley took. It is yours again. Her eyes burned. You did that before you knew I would stay. I did it because it was right. Whether you stayed or left, it was yours. It was always yours. She pressed her face into his chest and breathed him in, pine and iron and warmth, and she let the grief come, not the sharp grief of fire and loss, but the other kind, the quiet grief of years spent carrying something too heavy alone, the grief that loosened when someone finally said, "Let me hold this with you." He held her. The valley spread below them, dark and vast and full of stars, and the music from the hall drifted up through the stones, and neither of them moved for a very long time. 3 months later, Corinne stood on the same terrace, arranging scent burners along the stone rail, and the evening air carried white cedar and wild mint down the valley like a love letter written in fragrance. The bonding ceremony would begin at sundown. The hall below was filled again, not with political leaders this time, but with people who mattered. Fia, who had been persuaded to create the glass ceremonial vessels and who had subsequently refused to leave the keep, citing professional obligations that were transparently an excuse to stay close to the kitchen staff, was arguing cheerfully with the head cook about centerpiece placement. A delegation from the restored Belcourt estate had arrived that morning, carrying armfuls of wildflowers from the gardens that had been replanted, mint and cedar seedlings taking root in the same soil where Corinne's mother had once knelt. The Critchley trial had concluded 2 weeks prior. The forged documents, the falsified treason charges, the stolen lands, all of it laid bare before the full court. He had been stripped of his title, his holdings, his chain of office. The lands he had seized from the Belcourts had been restored. The grave where Corinne's mother was buried, the unmarked plot in a village that had not cared, had been given a stone. Corinne had chosen the inscription herself. It read, "She taught me that memory lives in scent. The mind forgets. The nose never does." Corinne placed the last burner on the rail, adjusted the wick. The scent rose, warm and layered, and she breathed it in, and the memory came softly this time, not as an ambush, but as a gift. A stone garden path. Small bare feet. A boy's hand in hers. "Hurry up, Corey." She smiled. "The arrangements are perfect." She turned. He was standing in the archway, dressed in dark blue and gold, the circlet in his black hair, his gold eyes warm in the fading light. He crossed the terrace to her, reached up and touched a loose strand of dark red hair that had escaped the chignon she had spent an hour arranging. "Your hair is falling," he said. My hair is always falling. It has a mind of its own. I know. It did the same thing when you were 7. He tucked the strand behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her jaw. I remember. She caught his hand, held it against her cheek. She is with me, she said softly. He looked at her, questioning. That is what I am going to say, she said. When they ask who I am, and where I came from, and how I ended up here, I am going to tell them. She is with me. She was always with me. The girl from the garden, the girl who ran, the girl who hid. She is still here. She came home. He pulled her close, pressed his lips to her forehead, to the bridge of her nose, to the corner of her mouth. Welcome home, Corey, he murmured. Below them, the hall filled with music and light, and the scent of white cedar and wild mint. And the evening came down over the valley like a benediction, and the girl who had spent 14 years being no one stood in the arms of the boy who had never forgotten her name, and she was, at last, exactly where she belonged.